Hi, everyone. My apologies first. We had some technical issues with the first run through of the parent town hall, and I sincerely apologize to everyone who may be watching this. We had initially set it up so we would have an unlimited number of participants, and for some reason, we ended up with only 100 able to get in. So my apologies for that. Um, I feel really terrible. Um, so I'm going to re-record the presentation for all of you. I'm going to also include in a number of the questions that parents had shared with us, and we'll hopefully, if you have any questions for that, I'll be absolutely ready to offer you my email address, and I'll get back in touch with you personally. I again apologize for the technical issues. As far as this meeting goes, we're gonna run through the our town hall meeting here. So I apologize again in advance. Apologize again. We have a number of core values that we're really trying to focus on as we go through this process together. First and foremost, we really want to stay connected to you, to your students, to to the families, and as colleagues, to everybody that's been involved with a really terrible situation. The reality is this is a complex situation, unlike any of us have uh, ever really been able to have a context for. But with that comes some incredible flexibility. All these words that are bolded here are bolded for a reason. We know we have to be flexible, both in terms of reinforcing learning, deepening learning, and providing some new material, particularly as we pivot. Um, Equity is important to us, especially as we look at access to resources, different family situations. I am not so blind to this as to realize that we are really dealing with a number of complex situations across different families and different types of learners, and we want to make sure that we meet all of their needs. Uh, the reality is that this is an unprecedented situation. There are a lot of emotions within people's homes. No two situations are the same. And we want to make sure that we are supporting everybody with whatever they may deal with on a day-to-day basis. And most importantly, we want people to grow. We want our students to grow. We want them to be able to come out of this as a positive, or as positive as can be. And that means supporting them academically, emotionally. Um, it means that at sometimes, we may be taking a back seat to introducing some new things to make sure that we make our connections stronger, and make sure that all students have the same kind of experiences. Here are some of the things we know. And this is, some of it you already know, but the reality is that Governor Baker has closed school through May 4th. There's a possibility that it could extend longer, and this is how the school year ends in this way. And the reality is that that's how we are planning. We are planning as if this school year will last longer than that. This closure will go beyond May 4th. And that way, if we're back, we're certainly more pleased and we're happy, and but we're prepared in case it does not. Like, I really got to tip my hat to our faculty in making a pivot. The emphasis when we first left on March 13th was on sharing resources, providing ways for our students to be connected to us. Uh, but last week, with the news from our governor and from Commissioner Riley that we are going to be closed through May 4th, our month of April is going to have a different focus, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the reality is that we want to be prepared not only for this closure to be happening right now, but that it could happen to last longer. So as we make that pivot, there's a consideration of new material. However, our school, Uxbridge High School, the Uxbridge Public Schools, we were not created as virtual schools. We were created as brick and mortar, and the things that happen in our building every day are amazing. But we are making some significant shifts to deliver work remotely. And again, a lot of credit to the support staff, the teaching staff, counseling staff, the educators, who have made this pivot really significantly and have worked so very hard to make it as seamless as possible. And we're going to have balance between those last 3 points there. As we make the shift this year, this week rather, over the next 3 weeks as we pilot this, that we're going to have balance between face-to-face contact, virtual class sessions, with lessons that can be completed asynchronously or independently by the students. We want to provide a schedule that has some structure as well as some flexibility. Now, the reality is that schedule was established, and we'll go into it again in a minute, so that our classes didn't overlap, so that our students would have the ability to connect with their teachers, to connect with each other over virtual means and email and whatever chat mechanisms they have in place, Google Hangouts and Zoom, and to be able to share resources. And to do so in such a way that was done with some flexibility around having work assigned on Monday and handed in on Friday, with a couple of days of class in between. But we really didn't want students to be in front of their computers for 8 or 9 hours a day doing academic tasks, particularly where we know that so many families have such challenging circumstances right now. The other part of that is that the commissioner's recommendation was that it's about a 50% ratio between what was provided in school to what's now being provided remotely. And if you take an hour a day for each class over 5 days, 2.5 hours per class per week, we're trying to be in that ratio, but we also know that those timeframes are going to have to be flexible. And there is an accountability piece. We are going to move towards giving kids credit for the work that they do. And so that work that is being assigned starting this week, April 6th, is required for the students to complete. So beginning this week, teachers will post assignments on Monday. They will also post focus areas for feedback. Students will get, this is what you're being assessed on. There will be some leaning into some new content. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute, but the reality is until we can really get a sense as to who has access, who has less access, we want to be a little bit cautious about going into some new content. And we want to focus these first couple weeks especially on regaining those connections, going back to the routine of learning, and providing some structure. But that still means that things are required. Engagement is not optional. There's an accountability piece. Now, does that mean if a student can't hand something in on Friday and hands it in over the weekend that it won't be accepted? Absolutely not. Again, I'm not so bold as to say that I know what's going on in every single family's household that could get in the way of something being handed in. But we also need that work handed in so that we can turn around that work with feedback and be able to plan moving forward. Virtual class periods will meet on Tuesday and Wednesday. We actually got this from the students. They want to be able to meet with all of their classes, and even over the last couple of weeks, teachers have posted their class times, and there's been some overlap and there's been conflict. And so by assigning a 45-minute window to each class on a day-by-day basis, specifically for Tuesday and Wednesday, we will make sure that we are able to, we're able to get all classes to meet and for students to not feel like they have conflicts. Now, if they need times outside of those windows, which is a very real possibility, we have the availability on the other days of the week and the afternoons on Tuesday and Wednesday for that to happen. Because teachers are available for office hours, for individual support, for a small group of students to say, hey, can we all meet together? Think of that like college office hours, where a teacher would post, I'm available on Thursday from 10 to 12. And you would show up, or you would send the person an email and say, hey, I need 15 or 20 minutes of your time. It could be such something that you send an email and say, look, my student needs some help. What works on Wednesday for you? And the teachers will get back to you. And the expectation is that there'll be some flexibility during school hours. Now, if you need to work something out for outside of school hours, again, do that on a case-by-case basis. But again, we'll talk about that in a minute about, just being flexible with the staff. And again, the assignments that are due on Friday must be completed for credit. When we talk about credit, when we talk about grading, students are going to receive feedback on the work they submit based on that criteria. If we happen to go back later in the year, we can reconsider those criteria and how well students did for grades. But right now, we're focusing on pass-fail. We have to work with our student information system and with our school profile to make sure that people understand why semester 2 was pass-fail, why quarter 4 was pass-fail, and what that means. But keep in mind, folks, that's really something that all schools across the country are dealing with. But we don't want to put our students at a disadvantage when it comes to applying for post-secondary opportunities, applying for college. So we have taken this very strongly into consideration. And again, if we're back in May, if we're back in June, and we have the ability to move quarter 4 back to grades, that is something that we absolutely will consider. Students who hand things in after the Friday, they could still receive credit. Students who hand something in that's below par and get feedback and want to do a better job, they can hand things back in and get credit. Again, the idea is that students have some level of accountability and that they're completing things that continue to keep the learning happening. And again, if we return to school, we will revisit quarter 4 and second semester. But right now, again, based on guidance from the commissioner, we're looking at pass-fail. In terms of MCAS, there have been some questions about MCAS. We've missed the window. So the ship has sailed for grade 8 and grade 10, the English tests specifically. We do have some decisions that need to be made with respect to the math and science tests for 8th, 9th, and 10th. 8th and 10th for math, 8th and 9th for science. There's also some consideration about what that means for a competency determination. Students who are missing the opportunity to potentially take the test to graduate from high school. That's legislative. We don't have a ton of information right now. We don't know whether this year's sophomores are going to have to take this next year as juniors. As we have more information, we will be sure to let you know. But right now, we're kind of on hold. I have been sharing my feedback. I think the educators in the room are saying, waive MCAS and let's see what we can do to maybe phase it out or make an exception for it. As far as AP tests go, we met with our AP students last week, and we shared with them what we know about the AP. Testing will be offered online, and it can be taken at home. That if we're back in school, we'll certainly give students the opportunity to take the test in the building, but it's going to be just one 45-minute open response section. There's not going to be any multiple choice to any of the AP tests. Our teachers have been given the content on which the test will be covered. And, what the College Board did was they said, this is where we think most of these tests should have been, most of these courses should be, by March. And for the most part, we were in pretty good shape. We did give them the green light, the teachers, to start introducing some new content. But in most of our cases, our teachers were and our units were in pretty good shape. For example, in the AP Lang test, the 45-minute open response section is going to be the synthesis essay or the rhetoric essay, one or the other. And it was one that we had spent a lot of time on in our classes. So our teachers feel very good about it. They have the students getting prepared. Most of our AP classes were very close. The one thing that we have to sort out from an AP standpoint is that next, some students still have to test, pay for the test, and we'll be coming up with an online mechanism for that to happen next week. In terms of senior events, we met with the seniors last week. It was kind of a sad meeting. I think my heart breaks for this group. They are a wonderful group of students, and there's just a lot of sadness in the room. None of these seniors expected this to be how their year would end. Their culminating events would be potentially, none of us expected this. Our prom has already been postponed. It was scheduled for May 1st. We are looking at alternative dates. We already have a couple of dates in mind. When we met with the seniors last week, we asked them to help us prioritize, meaning how late is too late? how long do you want us to go to plan some of these events? What are the ones that are most of a priority for them? For us as a community, our theme has been to postpone. We do not want to cancel any of these events. For some of them, we may be at the mercy of the governor. And, if there's a decision made that in July, we can have gatherings of more than 250 people, but not until then. We will do everything in our power to give this senior group the events that they so want and their families want. We are keeping that very, very, very much in our forefront. It is a huge focus for me. We are doing everything that we can. As far as senior college planning, counselors will be reaching out to seniors this week and next, families. If there are circumstances, questions about next year, financial aid things that may have changed, please reach out to the counselors. They'll help make those meetings a priority. I'm sorry, that should say that the scholarship information was shared by the counselors, not with the counselors. Sorry about that. And we've been in touch with a number of colleges who have pushed back deadlines. Some schools had May 1st deadlines. They've moved those to June. But I can't say this enough. If you have family circumstances that may have changed, the economy is in flux. Financial aid forms need to be adjusted. Please reach out to our counselors. Let them help direct you over to the college, and we will do everything in our power to help you out. Some other challenges we've identified. It's no secret. We've told our departments, you're not going to cover everything this year. Even if we come back, there are going to be some things that are not going to be covered. We want to make sure that we make connections with next year's content for those first few months. And that's not just our school, that's the district. We want to identify the things that are critical that we may not get to as well this year, so that we don't have our students feeling the ramifications of this several years down the road. And we're doing some curriculum access, curriculum revision on that end. We don't know what students have or do not have access. Some students have situations where there's maybe a device in the house, but there are 3 people that need to use it. The iPad isn't great. There's a laptop, but the mom and dad are working and they're still essential employees. And the older student is taking care of the younger students. And that's why we've tried to have some flexibility with our assignments and with what we have due. And we take that very, very seriously. And we have student services, things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, English language learning, special education supports, emotional supports that students may have. Before I move on from that point, I think this is just one of those things that we really want to make sure that if you feel like there are some things you need, I mean, even on a special ed standpoint, it's not going to be minute by minute. If things like an academic support class, we've actually told our teachers, reach out to the kids individually rather than trying to run an academic support class per se, because having individual support with those students may be easier for 15 minutes, half hour, a couple times a week, rather than trying to do things as a class or as a group. I want to focus. This is a look at our schedule. I'm going to focus for a minute. If you look at our schedule, there's some 45-minute classes here in the middle that we'll meet each day. But I really want to focus on the norms for virtual learning sessions that are in this bottom left corner. This is something we've shared out. Mr. DeMeglio did a really nice job of explaining to the students. We sent a video to them. A district not too far from here, there was a 7th grader, showed up for a class today, unmuted himself, started playing Fortnite, used some inappropriate language. We're really counting, in fact, we're begging the students to just do the right thing. As you noticed when you came into this building, into this particular meeting, those of you that were able to get in, and again, I apologize, there was a waiting room, there was a password. We're not publicizing those things. We're asking the students to make sure their video is turned on and they use their name. And if they don't do one of those 2 things, they will be not allowed into the room. They're not allowed to screen share. The only person who's allowed to screen share is the teacher. And if a student is unmuting himself or herself or using some inappropriate language or doing things that are wrong, we've instructed the students, the teacher, to just remove the student from the class. We really don't want to get in the business of having to do too much discipline. We all have enough going on, but if we have to impose consequences, we will. And that's just going to set up just kind of a nasty power dynamic. We don't want to get into that business, but if we have to, we will. So again, just telling the students to, the teachers are working really hard. They don't need any more of that sort of behavior than has already perhaps been reported. And we have some security measures in place, so you don't have to worry about Zoom bombing or people from the outside necessarily getting in. I mentioned staff access and availability. Our staff's available during regular hours. They'll be checking emails. They'll be posting some office hours. They'll be available upon request. Conferences, virtual calls, meetings. Again, typically we want those to occur during school hours, but if something happens, we understand. I can't say enough about the teachers and the staff. They are dealing with their own kids. They're planning lessons. They're changing things on the fly based on what we get from the state and what I give them. So please be patient. Even if it's, don't necessarily expect a response within 10 minutes and say, well, it was during the school day. We're doing absolutely the best that we can. And again, I mentioned some of the security measures. We have certain parameters. We've shared messages regarding their responsibility. And if we have to, we reserve the right to deny them access. I'm going to bring it back to these core tenets before we move on. Again, it's about staying connected. It's about being flexible. It's about providing a sense of equity, knowing that this is unprecedented, and continuing to support growth. Some questions that came up, and certainly if you're watching this and you were unable to make our session and you have questions, email me directly. I'll be happy to answer them. Some questions that came up, first was about the SAT. The SAT in May has been postponed. It's actually been canceled. It was offered at Uxbridge High School. Students who registered for that SAT, their fee is still paid. They'll just have to re-register for another date. We are at the mercy of the College Board if they're going to schedule the June SAT. Our hope is that they will, and we are working on having Uxbridge High School be a test site for June, because our students have already missed the March and now the May opportunity, and we know that that's a big deal for them. Secondly, another question that came up was about April vacation. Actually, there are a few questions about April vacation. I will begin by saying that is a decision made at a pay grade above mine. Because our school calendar is voted on by the school committee and it has an April vacation, they have to make that amendment. It would probably mean our school year would end a week earlier in June. There's some benefit as we're trying to, continue, and obviously for us, we want to continue to provide, build some momentum, but it's not a decision I can make. I promise that because this came up from multiple people, that I would share this with the superintendent. There was another question about whether the school committee meetings were open like this. They are public meetings. They are being done virtually. There are some rules about open meeting law that have been suspended by the governor. And I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how you get to participate in a school committee meeting, but I will make it very clear that the sentiment of this meeting was to have the kids continue to build momentum over April vacation. And as I said, it's a change for some of the teachers. It's a change for some of the families, perhaps, and maybe the kids. For me and Mr. DeMeglio, we work all year round anyways, and so I don't think it would be that much of a shift for us, but again, not a decision that I can make, but I can assure you will be made. There was a question that was brought up about special education students. They do follow the same schedule. They do have those same class meetings, and their teachers are following, providing them resources. Again, there's some change with respect to the academic support classes, but that's not about not providing kids a class as much as it is providing them with some different ways to get the supports that they need. As far as technology access, our district, Patrick Missler, our IT director, and our guru with respect to this, and his team have been phenomenal. I mentioned building a plane mid-flight. That's been one of the groups that's had to really take on a ton. If there are families that have technology access issues that you know of that have maybe not been responding to me, have them please email me. I will put them in touch with our technology folks who can work with them on devices, who can work with them on getting them connected with internet access. Spectrum has been really great about providing us with some resources, and we would love to be able to support them with that. As far as keeping things like PSG and graduation and all of those things in mind, again, our theme is postponement. We are going to do everything in our power. I don't know what it's going to look like to give these students a graduation and to give them some culminating events. Could the prom happen next school year? I mean, there are a lot of things on the table that we want to do right by these students. I want to do right by these families, and I know we all do. I've had teachers that have said, "Hey, if that prom is in July, I'll be back to chaperone." That's a credit to those students for sure, and that is really where among some of the things that we're discussing. I think that about one question came up about internships. We actually have a meeting tomorrow with the Department of Ed. I do, with respect to getting some resources for students that had internships who cannot get out to their jobs, so they can still get their credits. We are still, there'll be some questions I'm sure that will come up over the course of these next few weeks. I just want you to hear from me on behalf of our staff, our administration. Certainly, I don't speak for my boss, Dr. Tiano. We will hold these meetings as often as we can. We will support your kids and you and our families as much as we can. This is really complicated. It has been incredibly challenging, but we are going to do everything in our power to make sure we provide as much structure and normalcy with flexibility for your students as we can, and certainly for you. And if there's anything anybody can do from a school front, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can always email me. You can email Mr. DeMeglio. I think that's been our theme. We want to keep with that. We wish you all the best. Godspeed. Stay healthy. Keep those kids socially distancing. And actually, that's one thing I didn't mention yet. I'm glad I remembered from one of those earlier slides. Our intention is not to create tension in your homes. Our intention is not to create fights and power struggles and everything else. There is a sense of requirement. There is a sense that these classes are mandatory. There is a sense that these lessons are mandatory. The work is mandatory, but we also want to do right by you, and we don't know what everybody's family circumstances are. So please reach out if you need us. Please stay safe. Please stay healthy. And if you need us for anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I thank you all, and I wish you well. Be on the lookout, and tell your kids to be on the lookout for a video from our staff just saying hello. Thanks so much. Be well.